All right. Have you listened to S-Town yet? Oh, holy Alabama. If you haven't listened to S-Town yet, if you haven't downloaded that podcast, now is the time, because today, that's what I'm talking about. And don't worry, if you haven't listened yet, if you're only a little bit in and you haven't finished, there's not going to be any spoilers today, but I simply couldn't resist. I spent all weekend kind of binging on it and re-binging on it and re-binging on it. I must have listened to the whole thing at least 3 times by now, and I can't stop myself. I got to talk about it. So today's Facebook Live is all about 5 things that S-Town can teach us about creating great content. Because as you know, everyone, it's gotten up to 18 million downloads or something like that by now. So people are talking about this. And it's not the first time. S-Town came from the same creators of the people who did Serial and This American Life. And so those folks know how to make great content. And I figured, hey, I can't stop talking about S-Town, so I'm just going to keep talking about S-Town today and all the ways that it can teach us about creating great content. Because yes, I am a web designer. If I haven't already said it, hey, it's RKA coming at you live for a 5 and 5. I am a web designer. I am a digital strategist. And as much as I love creating beautiful things for my clients, content really is king. And your digital marketing strategy and your success online really does come down to the quality of the content that you're creating for people. So let's look at what S-Town, this amazing podcast, has to teach us. And if you want to talk privately with me about it, because I literally can't stop thinking about it, talking about it, and you want to talk about all those spoilers because you finished it, PM me. Let's have a chat, because I just have got some things to say. But in the meantime, I have some things to say that are not spoiler related about what it can teach us about great content. And the first thing that I noticed is the importance, when you're creating great content, or when you're creating content at all, of being able to adapt to meet your audience's needs. And so if you remember when Serial, the first installment, first came out and it was a huge hit and took the world by storm and everyone's like, audio, podcast, yes. It revitalized the podcasting world. They released an episode every week for 12 weeks. And S-Town now totally changed it up. And that was, I think, brave on their part. They noticed how the audience was changing, how Netflix and binge watching and just people's craving for how they desire, to consume content had changed. And so when S-Town came out, they just released it all. All 7 episodes are available right now, stownpodcast.org. And so they were willing to be adaptable. And I see this a lot with small business owners, that they kind of get into a groove with their content strategy and they've got something that works for them and they're really scared to change and to be adaptable. They get into this rigid space and they're not adapting to meet the changing needs of the market. They're not adapting to new technology. They're just kind of staying in what feels comfortable for them. And I think the first thing that the S-Town folks have taught us about creating great content is all about being able to be adaptable to where your audience is at and what they need. So, oh my gosh, am I already 3 minutes into this? I can't, time flies when you're having fun. So yeah, the first one is being adaptable to meet your audience's changing needs. And with that, piggybacking onto that, I would say for number 2, it's also about, when you're approaching your content, having a curiosity instead of a rigidity, almost being willing to let the content teach you something as you're creating it. And we see that in S-Town, because without spoiling anything, when you listen to that first episode of S-Town, you think it's going in one direction. And so did Brian Reed, the guy who's narrating for us and one of the main producers of the show. He thought that the story was going in one direction. And as we see over the course of the 7 episodes, we end up in a totally different place than we could have ever imagined. And if Brian Reed had gone into this kind of journalistic experience with one agenda and one idea of this is how it's going to go and this is how we're going to approach the topics, then we wouldn't have this amazing podcast that we do. And so it's all about being kind of open and flexible enough to say, hey, I'm going to go at this with a certain approach, a certain idea, but I'm also open to letting the creative process and letting this content teach me something as I'm writing it. And that's something I've learned a lot over the years. I'll go into writing a blog, for example, and I'll have one idea of what I want to say, and as I'm teasing it out and thinking through all the different ideas and all that kind of stuff, it changes. I realized that what I actually want to say is totally different than my original idea. And some of my greatest blogs and my greatest content have come out of that place of being willing to be flexible and let the content kind of teach me and being curious. So that's number 2. It's all about curiosity, adaptability, and letting the content kind of take you on a journey. Number 3 thing that I think that S-Town can teach us about really great content and creating great content is it's not all about you. Creating great content really depends on many perspectives. And I think I see a lot in this space of, all these kind of up-and-coming thought leaders. You want to be a thought leader. Everybody wants to be a thought leader. And they focus on, my ideas, my perspective. It's all about me. And they forget that creating great content today, especially, when you're pushing this content onto social media and you're putting this content out there to your audience, is about more than what you think about things. It's about placing yourself in the middle of a dialogue and, placing and contextualizing your thought leadership in the greater conversation. If you're too fixated on this is what I think and this is my ideas and you're not open to hearing other perspectives, to doing research, to seeing what other people are saying in the conversation, you're going to dilute what could be a really hard-hitting story. And if you look at S-Town, for example, we start off in episode 1 with our kind of main character, if you will, John B. McLemore, and then over the course of the 7 episodes, we're introduced to all these other characters. And we see that this story wouldn't be as deep, as rich, as engaging if we weren't introduced to all these other perspectives, if we didn't have kind of this whole, I don't know necessarily if you would call it a 360 view, but if we didn't have this whole kind of bigger perspective beyond just one person's vision of the story. And that includes Brian Reed, our narrator, who himself kind of throws himself into a space of, I don't quite know what the truth is, and I don't quite know what the conclusion I'm going to come to is, and I'm going to let these people that I'm interviewing and that I'm working with help guide the story. So it's not all about you when it comes to creating great content. You've got to place yourself in the midst of a bigger conversation. And yet, that bigger conversation and other people's perspectives can be a little bit dangerous because here's the truth. You can't please everyone, and that's number 4 on what S-Town can teach us about creating great content. If you approach your content with the desire of meeting everyone's needs and pleasing every single person in your audience and making sure everyone's going to agree with you, you're going to dilute the impact of that content. If you go online and you look at reviews for S-Town, which, by the way, I have yet to read a review that is not full of spoilers, so don't say I didn't warn ya. Don't say I didn't warn you. But if you go and you look at reviews, you'll see that there's a lot of differing opinions. There's some amazing reviews that are like, this is the greatest piece of audio journalism ever created. And there's some people saying, I don't think this should have ever been made. And criticizing kind of the approach, whether or not it was an invasion of privacy, whether or not certain topics were handled correctly. And if Brian Reed and the producers had the intention of pleasing every person in the audience, they would not have the impact that they have had with S-Town. Now, say what you will about whether or not you agree with how S-Town was approached and their journalistic style and whether or not it was an invasion of privacy, this whole maze of opinions, if you will. If Brian Reed had been afraid that he was going to alienate people and played it safe, I'll tell you what, he wouldn't have had the reviews saying this is one of the greatest pieces of audio journalism ever created. So, number 4, you can't please everyone. Don't even try. Just don't even try. And the final thing that I learned, and this is a little bit of a throwback because I wrote a piece a few years ago about what Serial can teach us about great content, and so I'm sort of borrowing number 5 here from Serial, from Serial and from my article about Serial, is great content leaves some questions unanswered. So you don't have to answer every question, every possible doubt or curiosity that your audience would have. In fact, you want to leave some questions unanswered. And there's 2 big reasons for this. Number 1, of course, the classic one is leave them wanting more. Okay, yeah, that's kind of easy. That's kind of obvious. I'm not going to go into that. But the second one is that when you leave unanswered questions, you're opening up that space for dialogue, which I was just talking about a few minutes ago. This idea that, leaving questions unanswered, it invites your audience in to make their own hypotheses, to engage critically with your material, and to allow them to kind of take the conversation and keep running with it. I know, right? So Tiffany's saying, I does, but I hate it, and so do I, because there's some questions that we would really want answered at the end of S-Town, and I'm not going to spoil it for you, but let's just say that they don't give us everything that we could possibly want. And Natalie Taylor says, so important to take a stand and risk turning off some people, like what I was saying before. You're not gonna please everybody, and that's so right. So, in my opinion, great content, you're gonna have some unanswered questions. And that can be soothing, because sometimes I'll see small business owners thinking, oh gosh, I can't publish this blog, or I can't do this video, or I can't do this podcast because I haven't quite wrapped up the story yet, or I haven't quite covered every possible angle, and I got to keep going. And the truth is, if you do that, you'll never be done. And you'll also run the risk of pushing away potential dialogue and communication that you can have with your audience vis-a-vis this content. So that's it, folks. That's the 5 things that S-Town can teach us about creating great content. I mean, I'm just going to admit, selfishly, I just wanted to talk about S-Town some more. That's basically why I did this video today, because, I can't stop talking about it, can't stop thinking about it. And if you haven't listened yet, get yourself over to stownpodcast.org, download it, 7 episodes. You won't be able to put it down, if you will, or put your ears down, or whatever is the audio equivalent of putting a book down. You won't be able to do that. So have a great day. And if you want to hear more about my approach to creating content and preparing yourself for a really awesome digital marketing strategy that leaves an impact on an audience, head to don'thireawebdesigner.com. Don'thireawebdesigner.com. I got you there with some cool stuff. Otherwise, I'll see you next week.